Welcome to America's First Warriors Stories of Today's Airmen and Guardians. In celebration of Native American Heritage Month, this 5 episode series explores the stories of members of the Air and Space Force through candid conversations centering around their individual backgrounds and culture. By gaining a better understanding of the members of our total force, we become a more rich and ready team. I'm your host, Chief Master Sgt. Mark Legvold, Command Chief of the 133rd Airlift Wing, Minnesota Air National Guard. Joining me today on America's First Warriors is Tech Sergeant Slone Lafontain. Sergeant Lafontain is an instructor in airman leadership stationed at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona. Prior to teaching and developing our airmen, she was a public health technician and is enrolled with the Turtle Mountain tribe of the Chippewa Nation. Welcome, Slone.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
There you go. First thing off the bat, you're calling me sir. That's okay. I'm much older. That's fine. Hey, you've been in for about 11 years now, stationed at 3 different bases. How do you stay connected to your culture and heritage as such a mobile person?
It's really difficult. I found, especially in the beginning, to be really difficult to keep my roots where they're at. Something that I've tried to do routinely is continue to smudge. That includes taking sage or cedar and just praying and connecting with Creator. And so that's one way. I try to also continue to educate myself on our history and staying involved in recently, I guess over the last year, I've tried to become more, what's the word, crafty, if you will, in creating regalia. So that includes like making ribbon skirts. I made my first jingle dress, which is a form of dance that we use for ceremony. Attempted to make my son his first pair of moccasins, and they're still unfinished. But trying to continue doing activities that connect me to my roots.
You mentioned to me earlier that you are a craft starter, but not necessarily a craft finisher. That sounds like your best way of staying connected, though.
Yes, definitely. Last week, actually, when my son was sick, I made a ribbon skirt that I had made a mistake on, which is not a bad thing at all. I think they say, our ancestors say, in beadwork and in anything you make, we should never strive for perfection. So if there's a mistake, it's not a bad thing at all. Anyhow, I created this ribbon skirt, and the ribbons are supposed to line up, and I did it like diagonal, and I did it flip flop it, so the ribbons are going one way on the front side and the opposite way on the other on the back side. But I posted it on my Snapchat, and I was like, well, I made a huge mistake on this one, but does anybody want it anyway? So gifting that to somebody is also just another way for me to stay connected.
That's wonderful. Can you explain the significance of the ribbon skirt and what makes that a unique part of your heritage?
So I actually learned about it about a year ago when I started making them. They're used to symbolize, based off my understanding, the woman's um, reproductive organs. So they're to protect us in that manner. Um, and actually, the history of like where our ribbons came from and things like that was through trading with um, different cultures. There wouldn't always be with other Native Americans. So things that we had that we could trade for, they provided us, um, like a lot of where our jewelry comes from trading. So in a lot of old pictures, you will see um, our ancestors very decorated with jewelry and things like that. So the ribbon skirt essentially is protecting the woman's reproductive organs.
So there's symbolism to that. And is that specific to the Chippewa Nation, or do other Native American nations, other nations, use the ribbon skirt in that same manner?
I'm not familiar if other nations or tribes use the ribbon skirt for the same sense, but I know that many, if not, well, all tribes that I know of, the ladies wear ribbon skirts. So it's not anything specific to Turtle Mountain Chippewa.
Understood. Okay. So you are engaged in raising two boys, 6 and 19 months old. Uh, that makes you a pretty busy mom. What are you hoping to pass down to your next generation when it comes to your cultural heritage? And how are you doing that?
It's difficult, especially to be an enrolled member of a tribe, you have to, well, at least for my tribe, you have to have at least a quarter um, of your blood quantum has to be Native American. And I am just under half. So having kids with non-Native American, non-enrolled Native Americans, they did not, they're not able to be enrolled, but they're considered descendants, which is just another whole different topic to get onto. But so letting them know, first of all, that they are Native Americans is one thing, and it's really hard to explain to a 6-year-old what that means when he's not surrounded by his culture.
Yeah.
So I grew up pretty much surrounded by that culture, so it was easy for me to understand. So whenever I'm playing like some powwow music and things like that, he really enjoys it, and I talk about how it's healing music and things like that. So I think just playing powwow music, explaining what a ribbon skirt is, and there's also ribbon shirts. I'm unfamiliar with like what those mean for men. Uh, so he's like the different dances. I try to show him the male dancers and like different options there are. And also being in the military, it's hard to go to powwows because powwows happen. They start sometimes on Thursdays and Fridays, and then they end very late on Sundays.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to take leave, not that taking leave is ever an issue, but I don't want to take my kids out of school and things like that. Um, just trying to educate the best I can, and especially as we come upon the Thanksgiving holiday, and we recently celebrated Indigenous Peoples Day, explaining to him what those holidays are.
That's
One way.
it does sound like a struggle. And right now uh, you're in Tucson, Arizona, which is far from the Chippewa Nation's geographical center. So,
Yeah.
do you find friends and colleagues in the Air or Space Force that you can identify with and maybe do some of those best practices or teach them together?
So gosh, I want to say it was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I found a powwow here, actually in Tucson. My son was Cordell, the 6-year-old. He was only a year and a half old, maybe at the time, so he didn't wasn't really engaged. Um, and it wasn't a similar powwow that I'm used to. So I guess no, it's hard to find like it's hard to find other Native Americans um, in my around here. I
Yeah.
mean, if you look at the data of the number of Air Force members or DoD members in general who identify as Native Americans, there's not many of us. So, I mean, I'm sure if I went out to the civilian population, I could certainly find others in the community who I could find fellowship with and do those best practices.
I'm sure that definitely would help, but there is a struggle there, especially when in the military, especially we move around a lot, and so in a place for 2 to 3 to 4 years, and then you move again, and you're finding a whole new circle of friends and family members and tribal members. I'm sure that is a struggle.
Yes, I will say, when I was stationed in Turkey, I was, um, I would think I was on base somewhere, and I saw this lady, and she had really long hair, and it was beautiful. I was like, oh my gosh, I wonder if she's Native American. And like, I've been asked multiple times, what are you? Because um, I look like I could be multiple different things. I look like I'm not exactly. People don't guess right away that I'm Native American. So I
Mm-hmm.
asked her, and I said, hey, are you Native American by chance? And she was like, yeah. And I was like, oh my gosh, me too. I've never found somebody since joining that is also Native American. She was a spouse of a Air Force member. And of course, we automatically had that immediate connection, and we hit it off from there. We've been friends ever since. And of course, the military has, of course, split us up from there, but we maintain contact.
Certainly. It that you bring up a real interesting a question that I have through your story, Sloan, and that is somebody like me, Caucasian guy, and I have an interest in people's stories and their perspectives in life. What's the best way for someone like me to approach someone like you and not be disrespectful by asking about their heritage or their culture? Can you
I
coach me?
think that is, um, I wish I could say I could. I think it's very subjective in how other people, you know, in communication, we all have, I guess, soft spots, if you will, or areas that we find offensive that you don't mean. Like, so I have no problem in somebody coming up to me and be like, "Oh, you don't look like an easily identifiable person to tell where you come from. Can you tell me what are you?" And some people take that very offensive.
Yes, of
I don't.
course.
I'm um, happy to share what I am. So I guess when I try to ask, especially like Hispanic people, you can never tell are they where they originate from. Are they
Hmm.
Dominican? Are they Puerto Rican? Are they something else? So I was asked, oh, where do you come from? And then they say, and I was like, oh, where's your family from? And I just slowly try to like build that rapport from there, so that it's not like, oh, what are you? Um, where are you from? Where's your family from? And things like that.
It has always been that awkward walking up to somebody and saying, "What are you?" is just so. It just feels like this is not the right way of approaching somebody with an open heart, with a good question, just out of
Right.
a
I
good
think
sense of curiosity, right?
definitely. I think people mean well in what they do, and I think some people just it's hard for them to. I mean, we all grew up differently, so.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of growing up, Colstrip, Montana. You lived on the reservation early in life, and then moved to Colstrip. That's a pretty rural setting. I mean, you're out there in the
Oh yes,
sticks. Then you run off and
definitely.
join the Air Force. So, first question: how did you choose the Air Force? Tell us about your path. But then that adjustment between living in a real rural setting, and then you've been to all kinds of different places, including uh, living in Anchorage, Alaska, and Tucson, Montana. Uh, hey, that or Tucson, Arizona. Geez, those are some pretty urban centers. Tell us about that adjustment. But first, Sloan, if you don't mind, tell us your Air Force story. How did you come to join the Air Force?
All right. So I think it's a common misconception that Native Americans get to go to college for free. That is not true. Um, so anyways, going through school, high school, middle school, I did really well. I excelled. I got good grades for the most part, except for chemistry. I don't know, I just couldn't get it. I still got a C. I mean, whatever. But I did really well in school. I never had any issues. So I thought I would go off to college and do my best. However, going through school, I always held at least 2 to 3 jobs at a time on top of maintaining my grades
Hmm.
because I was used to having my own funds. Because my parents also said, if you want to have these $100 jeans, you're going to go buy them yourself. I'm not buying you $100 jeans. So I said, okay, I'll get them myself. I maintained my 2 to 3 jobs, and I always had a lot of money for a high schooler.
Sure.
So I was like, dang, I'm gonna go to college. It wasn't until my going into my senior year, I was like, dang, I'm gonna go to college and be a broke person because I mean, I'm not gonna obviously get a full ride because I wasn't focused on sports. I mean, I wasn't doing the best I could in my academics, so there was no
Hmm.
way I was gonna get a full ride. Um, so I said, okay, what's my next option? I'm really kind of tired of school too. So I told my Mom, I got to talk to you. And my mom also said, you're going to college, you're going to the military. Um, that's your only option. You're not staying at my house. I said,
Either
okay.
way, you're
So I
going.
told them, yes, you're getting
Yep.
out of my house.
Yep.
Yep. So I told her one day, I got to talk to you. I'm not going to college. I think I'm going to join the military. And in my family, nobody I know has ever volunteered for the military. My grandfather joined the army and my uncle joined the army, but they were drafted.
Okay.
So it was completely walking into the unknown. And since I'd only known that about the army, I went to the army, the recruiter's office, and he showed me his cool binder of all the cool toys he has and all the cool places he's been, and I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. But I don't know if I want to do that. So then I thought about like other people who have joined the military who haven't joined the army, and somebody I'd worked with, he had joined the Air Force, and I was like, you know what, let me check it out. I went and talked to the Air Force recruiter, Tech Sergeant Carpenter at the time, and yeah, and from there, I had to lose weight. I had to learn how to do push-ups because I didn't do push-ups despite the sports I played. But yes, I think my biggest hurdle to joining the Air Force was having to lose weight. And then, of course, getting a job. I was in the DET program for a long time, the delayed entry program, because I didn't want just any job. I wanted a medical job. And I remember getting a call in like October, I think, of 2010, well after I had graduated, and he said, how does leaving in January sound? I was like, oh my gosh, sounds incredible. So I left on January 11th, 2011 to basic training.
Getting out of Montana in January is a good idea.
Oh yes, straight down to San Antonio, Texas.
Absolutely. I'm speaking to you from Minnesota, so it's the same thing. It's like, what can I do to get out of this cold? So away you go. You go to the hot spot in San Antonio, and boom, you become an airman and go through public health school, right?
Yes. So leaving the sticks and being introduced to more city life, if you will. I had been exposed a little bit throughout my life. My uncle had taken me places. My parents had brought me a couple places. And like through school, I had been on planes before, so it wasn't like a huge culture shock. But of course, I was a young 18-year-old with not a lot of life experience, and I thought I knew it all. I thought I knew how to manage my money. But I did not. In fact, I was still all about buying $100 pairs of jeans and things like that. So that was
the Air Force gives us free clothes, Sloan.
Yes. Gives you free clothes. I still have to utilize my clothing allowance on an annual basis.
That is a difference between the guard. Yep.
Yes. Yeah. Going to Turkey, I would say it was as a 19-year-old, because by the time I had graduated public health technician school, I was 19. And that was a culture shock. You talk about being in America your whole life and then going to a different country across the globe. It was interesting. And I look back now and I was like, I was so naive to what was going on around me. I didn't bat an eye. Like the things I saw, I was like, oh, okay, that just must be normal. Yeah. But I wish I would have taken advantage more of the opportunities that were there.
What did that experience of going through that culture shock of being in America your whole life and then moving to a place that has a completely different culture, what did that teach you about how important it is to appreciate your own culture?
See, that's where I feel like I was so young and naive. I didn't think anything of it. I look back now and I'm like, it's eye-opening to think about years ago when my elders were removed from their home and put in a third, what was completely unknown to them. That's where I found the gratification of being in America, being an American citizen. Yeah. Just still having all my rights, being able to wear what I want to wear and things like that.
Yeah. You moved from Turkey then and headed on up to Alaska, right?
Yeah.
And that was an opportunity for you to you do you were forced into a position where you had to develop a sense of resiliency beyond what most people are exposed to during your time up there. Do you mind sharing that story about what happened to you up there in Alaska?
Yes, absolutely. Um, it's I was living a grand life. I think I was 21 years old. So that means I'm coming up on, gosh, what, the 9th year anniversary of this experience.
Mm,
I was a young 21-year-old enjoying my life. I was out on a Saturday night with some friends, and we were at a bar. Like, I don't know, most 21-year-olds, I suppose, on a Saturday night. But when I got here, it was the first time I had ever been there, and I was like, this isn't the vibes. If we're talking 2022 language, wasn't feeling the vibes. So I told my friends, hey guys, I'm gonna head out. They really liked that spot. They had been there multiple times. So I said, hey guys, I'm gonna head out. I don't want to ruin your guys' fun. So I texted one of my friends and asked if he could pick me up. He said, perfect. I'll be there in a little bit. And he said, I'm only a couple minutes away. I was like, cool. I'll go wait outside. I was outside for maybe 5 minutes or so, and it's of course completely dark outside. We're talking November in Alaska, so the light was becoming minimal. Um, and I started hearing fireworks. Like, oh, that's weird, fireworks. Well, whatever, maybe somebody's celebrating something. And before something clicked in my mind, I had realized that's not fireworks; those are gunshots. So I'm on my way to, of course, get down on the ground because I don't know where they're coming from. And before I knew it, I had this extreme pain hit my body and I was on the ground. I screamed and I was like, I think I just got shot. I had crawled underneath the car because I was still hearing gunshots going off. And when it stopped, I called my mom because whenever I was an eighth grader and my oldest sister was a senior at the time, she got a phone call in the middle of the night that my sister had passed away in a car accident.
mm,
And having her gone through that trauma already from receiving that phone call, I wanted her to know that when she got the phone call that I had been shot, that it would be for me and that I was okay. I thought I
yeah.
was gonna. I mean, I thought I was okay. And obviously I am. So I wanted her to get that phone call from me. From there, of course, I got somebody called the ambulance, and I got to, of course, the hospital. And uh, I was also happy to say that I'd only had one Bud Light that night, so I was not intoxicated or anything like that. So getting my treatment was easy to explain how I felt and things like that. I got great care at the hospital, and then I had also found out that two other people had gotten shot there. One had gotten shot in the head, and one got grazed on the shoulder. Um, they asked, "Do you want to talk to that person?" I'm like, "No, I don't even know who it was." Um, So, anyways, I continued to heal. Mind you, at this time, I couldn't feel my legs. Um, like I couldn't move any of my lower extremities. So we didn't know what that meant for me. Um, they did, of course, MRIs and things like that, and found that it had, damaged some area of my hip and things like that. Well, a few days go by, and I'm getting like the feelings back in my legs and my hip area, and I'm able to get up and walk, which was an incredible feeling. Um, like it just was really like a breath of like I sighed of like
Yeah.
relief. Like I didn't want that to be me. Um, but that was the easy part, I guess, healing physically.
Yeah.
Because from that I had a lot of mental trauma from I didn't know who shot. I didn't know what that purpose was. And I thought I didn't know anybody. I'm not related to gangs and things like that. So I remember one day after an appointment for, cleaning up the area and things like that, making sure it was healing fine. I was in the hospital for like a week and a half, I think, so not terribly long, not long at all. Um, I'm sitting in my car and I start crying. I'm like, oh my gosh, now I look back, I was having probably an anxiety or panic attack. Like somebody's going to come find me, they're going to kill me. So I had to seek mental health help after that. So I navigated that, navigated going through therapy. I was ended up being um, diagnosed with PTSD. And at this time, I think a lot of people still thought that PTSD was only related to those who were in combat.
Yeah.
I think in the last few years, we've really come a long way in what PTSD is. And from being diagnosed with PTSD, I was able to be a part of the Air Force Wounded Warrior program. And with that program, I was able to build relationships with people who had also been through traumatic events. Whether
Yeah.
I'm actually one of the ladies that it was in that program, she had a very similar situation than me, and hearing her story, it just um, I could relate to her, and I wasn't able to relate to anybody else. Like in at my work center, my mental health therapist, of course, they did what their job required them, but I didn't feel like nobody understood how I felt. And when she shared her story, it was like, you understand, I understand how you felt. And that really helped my mental health healing journey tremendously.
Sloan, you
But
mentioned
at
that
the
this
same
is, oh, I'm sorry, please.
no, go ahead.
You
At
mentioned
the
that
same
this is
time,
9 years on from that incident. Are you still, is that still part of the recovery process?
oh certainly.
Yeah.
I think there's different things that will trigger in the back of my mind trigger those thoughts and things like that. A few weeks ago, I started reading this book, Never Split the Difference. It's a book on negotiations and things like that. And I'd read like the first chapter of it, and that evening or that night, I had a nightmare of being shot again. Um, I think it's still something, I, I still work through those moments.
Yeah. We thank you for sharing that story, and continuing the work on that. It just shows that strength and resilience doesn't. It takes work. It's not just
Definitely.
one event that you get through and then you're done. It takes good hard work, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And the person who shot the three of us essentially was never held accountable. The Alaska or Anchorage District Attorney's Office decided that they did not have sufficient evidence in identifying the shooter,
Mm-hmm.
so that never went to trial. Um, and I had always had the desire to get out of public health as a career field and cross train. So I had applied for cross training for multiple different jobs, and I was told no because of the diagnosis that came from the gunshot wound. So I applied for paralegal. I applied for paralegal. They said, no, we don't want the events that you've occurred have to trigger you if you cross train. I was like, okay. And oh, by the way, you're ineligible for security forces and like 4 other jobs. I was like, dang, they just told me not only no to this job, but no to the 5 others.
Mm-hmm.
So I gave that up for a little while, and then like a year or two later, opportunity came up for me to cross train and to become a boom operator, and I was like super excited about this. I'd gone through the flight physical stuff, and they said, okay, we'll have to try and submit a waiver for you because of your mental health history. I said, okay, that's no problem. I feel great. Um, and well, that turned out to be the same thing, as we don't want some in-flight emergency to cause you to be triggered and cause you to go into anxiety or panic attack. And I was like, wow, okay. So that one stung too. Um, so I said, how much control does this person have over my life now? The
Mm-hmm.
things that the the pain that they caused isn't just the pain that my body feels, but also has stunted my career progression and things like that. So that took a long look in the mirror to figure out, to take control of the situation. Locus of control is something I teach a lot about now in the classroom. Is, do you let things happen to you, or do you make things happen? So that's
You've
when it's part of resilience.
Yeah. Do you feel like you've landed in this? You're in a leadership position. You're instructing our newer or developing supervisors, and you get to share your story of strength with them. Are you making better supervisors for the future?
That is, I hope so. I do share my story with my students. We talk a lot about warrior ethos in the beginning of each class. And I think every airman has a story. And that's what I think is important for them as new supervisors to understand is there's a reason somebody's acting the way they are. And what I want for them to figure out is why are they acting that way? Because oftentimes we'll just put a label on somebody for them acting the way they are. So I really encourage them to know their airman story, ask them what happened to you, so that they can better lead them.
I wholeheartedly agree, and sharing airman stories is really what we're accomplishing here. And I'm so glad that you're sharing yours. Earlier, I asked you a question about how to approach or how to ask a question of someone that you're interested in finding their heritage, and you talked about a soft spot that they may have. And one of the stories that you had shared with me earlier is, I asked you who from the past do you admire, and you shared with me the story of a man named George Gillette. And Mr. Gillette signed away. Uh, he signed away a lot of acres of land for the Garrison Dam up in western North Dakota, and 900 Native American families were forced to move. And the story is centered that you shared with me is centered around the photograph of that moment in time when he signed it away. And this man is literally surrounded by people at the signing ceremony, and he's weeping openly. And that brings up that idea of generational trauma. And you talked a lot about PTSD. Can you give a little inkling into what the generational trauma of some of our Native American communities is, and how that is carried, and what better looks like?
Okay, so yes, that story, and I'm not even a descendant of George Gillette and that reservation, but it just speaks so loudly to like who Native Americans are and what they went through. I think the generational trauma that I am most familiar with is how it relates to the Indian boarding schools, and what that did to how I was raised, how my mother was raised, and things like that. My grandparents on both sides, well, my grandmother on my mom's side and my grandparents on my dad's side both went to boarding school, and they each had a little bit of a different experience. My grandmother on my mom's side had the worst, and that resulted in my grandma making my grandmother and the way that she raised my mom, and of course my aunts and uncles. So that led to how my mom learned to raise children.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess we raise our children how we thought we were supposed to be raised. Um, there was things that my grandma may have done to my mom that thought, let's see, how do I phrase this? We learn from what we see, right? And my mom learned to raise kids how my grandmother raised them. And whether that was right or wrong, it's hard to say in the moment. But there's just a lot of room for improvement. The trauma my grandma went through in boarding school led to how she raised my mom and my grandparents. I guess I'm talking in a circle here. What I'm trying to say is there's a lot of trauma from the Indian boarding schools, and I think a lot of times people try to say, well, that happened so many years ago, get over it. Well, if it's not get over it, um, it's different now, so you don't have to worry about it. Well, I do have to worry about it because the way I was raised is the way I was raised, and the reason I was raised that way is because my grandma, who went to boarding school, was treated the way she was.
Sloan, you
I don't know if that answers your
articulated
question.
no, actually, the holistic story of who you are and the work that it takes to become resilient. it's not a matter of just that happened years ago and just get over it. It takes work to get through, and become stronger because of trauma, doesn't it?
Mhm. Yeah.
You're a perfect example of that, and doing it well. Slone Lafontain, thanks for joining me on America's First Warriors. You are a fascinating story, and so glad that you are influencing future generations, and maintaining your sense of culture and heritage through that process. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Chief, for having me. It's really a pleasure.
Absolutely. Joining me now is the award-winning Master Sergeant Frances Dupris. Sergeant Dupris is stationed at Peterson Space Force Base in Colorado. She's an active member of the Indigenous Nations Equality Team and is a passionate advocate for Native American issues. Welcome.
Hello. Well, glad to be here.
Glad to have you with me. First off, can you share your tribal affiliation with us?
Yes. Well, I wanted to greet everybody in my Lakota language. So Chante Washte Anape Ochiu Japi Francis Dupri Machi Api United States Air Force Akichita Itancha Washi Echamu Shishango Oyanke Naha Northern Arapahoe Mataha. So I greet you all with a warm, heartfelt handshake. My name is Francis Dupri. I am in the United States Air Force, and I come from the Rosebud and Northern Arapaho tribes.
Francis, where did you learn to speak the language?
Well, very recently I learned sort of on my own to expand upon that. However, I grew up with my grandmother and my great grandmother, my unchis, speaking the language in their home.
And
I can
tell us about your grandma, especially you mentioned that your grandma was your primary influence. Your great grandmother never spoke English to you. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But your grandma was the one that really gave you a great deal of influence and respect in your culture and heritage. How did she pass that along to you?
Thanks for asking. I kind of wrote on this too in my 70th ISR Wing diversity inclusion letter. So to answer your question, growing up, I was exposed to my Lakota language, mainly around, like you said, my paternal grandmother, Louise Ecotel Quickbear, or Louise Wambli Sinte, and Mato Ohanko, and my great grandmother, Rebecca Quickbear. Both my grandfather and great grandmother, or sorry, grandfather on my dad's side, had journeyed on into the spirit world before I was born. But at one point in my childhood, I lived with both of my unchis and my grandmothers, which was a really great time because I would hear them speak to each other daily, only in our Lakota language. My unchi Rebecca, she only spoke Lakota, and but very often my unchi Louise, she's my paternal grandmother, so my father's mother, would take me with her to church each Sunday, and then we would sing songs in Lakota. And I was very young, but reading and singing in that language, I felt like came really natural to me. So, and when I reflect back upon that now, I feel like the language has always been a part of who I am. And I remember singing in church, and I looking up at my grandmother mouthing the sounds of the words. And I wrote this in the newsletter too, but I felt like that was my language class, and she was my teacher. And I cherish those moments spent with both of them very, very much. Um, Even though at the time I was very young, uh, understanding the impact of boarding schools, and I didn't understand at the time why I did not speak Lakota as fluently as them. However, now, um, I'm trying to expand upon that, and knowing that boarding school was a negative impact on that on them, and us to this day, including my children, it's kind of like generational trauma. And but I know that time in her life it was hard on her, and that's one of the reasons why I definitely tried to expose that more to my children and to myself.
Tell me how you've got 4 kids, 19 all the way down to age 2. How are you actively passing on the language and culture to your kids?
So today, for example, I went and I spoke to my daughter's class, her fourth grade class, and I shared the language with all the students there, and they were very excited to learn. Um, and with my specifically my fourth grader, she knows how to count to 10 in the language, and then we just use it here and there at home. So like we say, go ask your ate, which means dad, and mother is ina, and so we just use it, very sparingly, like throughout the day. It's just to get our children fluent in the not fluent, but going towards fluent in the language.
Hmm. And then, so your 19-year-old or your older kids, you've got two that are in that 19, 18 years old. What part of your culture have you seen them actively pick up? And are they just as passionate as you are, or are they a little bit more reserved?
So I do have a 19-year-old. His name is Chris John Dupris Jr. And then my 18-year-old daughter Sophia Dupris, and then like my 9-year-old, and then I have an almost 2-year-old. But my 19-year-old, back when he was very first a teenager, he went to Sundance with his grandfather, my husband's father. And Sundance is a ceremony that, specifically for our culture, our Lakota culture, we take part in that usually around like the summertime frames, and that's I could take up like a lot of your airtime, but like that's a really sacred time for my son to do with his grandfather.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you're taking the time to share this. Telling the stories of the families of our Native American people. It's a key part of keeping the spirit alive and making sure we don't forget the voices of the past and the lessons. You talked a little bit about generational trauma and your grandmother and your great grandmother and the boarding schools, and how difficult it is and what an active process it is for families and communities to move through. I don't want to say move beyond or move past, but move through that idea of generational trauma. Can you share how that goes, how that journey is going for you and your family, if you don't mind?
Absolutely. Um, I like that you said that, like not move through it, right? We'll never forget, right? So I think like it's equivalent to how we will never forget the events that occurred on 9/11. So our, indigenous community will never forget, what happened to our ancestors. Um, so initially, I used to think, and I guess I was walking in two worlds essentially. I'm sure you may have heard that term before. Um, but lately, and as I've gotten older, I realized the more that you are yourself, the more effective that you can be, especially being in leadership positions and just in general in life, not just in the military, but in your life. I feel like being your authentic self is what definitely helps get through day to day interaction, and specifically for being in the military, I think it is best to be your authentic self and lead with your authentic self, because that definitely helps an effective work environment, and then that way also, and I guess on a daily you can celebrate diversity, right, and inclusion, and equality and accessibility just on a daily. If we didn't have these Heritage Month events, like just people being their authentic self, no matter what race, what gender, etc. Like that's I think that's the right way to be.
Thank you. Native American Heritage Month is November, and it's just 1 month. And I really appreciate, how celebrating diversity is something we should be doing every day. Recognizing it is one thing, but actually recognizing the value that it brings to our culture in the military, that's a whole nother point. What about serving in the military, Francis, as a Native American, have you found to be rewarding? And have there been challenges along the way as well?
So there has been some challenges for me, and I like to think those that have not been have those that do go through adversity, it makes them a well-rounded, more experienced person. But I do believe that there are issues facing Native Americans in the military, that are similar to other military members, right? But there's also barriers and challenges for minorities in general and Native Americans included in that have been brought to attention with the Department of the Air Force through, I'm sure our listeners have heard of the disparity reviews. Some of those challenges, our Indigenous Nations Equality Team, which is one of the DAFBOGs, the Department of Air Force Barrier Analysis Working Groups, um, are working towards removing barriers, possibly changing policy. One of those policies that we're working on is for male hair length changes to be similar to the female hair length policy. And then even to take it a step further than that, because it's all about inclusiveness, right? Is to possibly make it a gender neutral policy for hair length, so that way it encompasses the other DAFBOGs out there. Like we have LIT, which is the LGBTQ plus initiatives team. We have HEAT, which is the Hispanics initiatives team, and then PAC-T, which is the Pacific Islander Asian American Community team, and plenty of others too, right? So which we want to be inclusive, but our first step is that male hair policy for Indigenous males, and since this podcast, we know of 5 that have an approved religious accommodation for Indigenous males in the Air Force to grow their hair out long, which is super awesome. We're all excited about that. And then we also have other lines of efforts too.
I'm so glad that you brought up the policy change, especially on hair length. And for a follically impaired Caucasian male, Francis, would you mind explaining why? Glad you picked up on that. Could you explain why the male's hair length is an important cultural issue for our Native American men?
Oh my gosh, yes. Okay. I'm glad that you asked that. So hair length for some indigenous cultures, specifically I can speak for my Lakota tribe, Lakota, Nakota, and Dakota. We consider our hair sacred, but it's much more than that. It's a connection to our ancestors. It's a connection to our community, our indigenous community, and it's who we are as a people. And when we cut our hair, those that practice our traditional ways, we cut our hair only for certain reasons. We cut them when we're in mourning for somebody. We cut them for, other reasons as well, and it's not just for styling purposes. As a matter of fact, I've had a handful of male students and youth ask me, because they know I'm in the Air Force, but they tell me that they want to join the military, but they don't want to cut their hair. And so I know that's a huge deal. And whenever I briefed it to the Secretary of the Air Force last November in the Pentagon, that there are 5 times at a greater rate that Native American and Alaska Natives serve in the United States Armed Forces, at a five times higher rate than any other ethnicity per capita. And when I looked at the Secretary of the Air Force, the Honorable Frank Kendall, and I was like, "Sir, can you imagine that number if our male hair length policy were to change?" And so, I mean, that's just tells you like that story that I told, and the handful of youth that were asking me about it, and the 5 religious accommodation approvals, like that just tells you that I hope that we're stepping in the right direction, part of the Department of the Air Force.
I do as well, and you talk about being an inclusive organization, and the military, while not perfect, has kind of, we push policy ahead of the way society will push policy. And even though a degree of sameness and uniformity is something that's always been a call in the military, what I've found to be incredibly refreshing, moving into the past 2 decades of my service has been that, yes, uniformity is important. However, individuality is also something that makes us a more battle effective organization. If people go to war and they feel comfortable in their own skin and comfortable with the people to their left and right, we're a more effective fighting force. Do you believe that operationally policy changes like this will make us more effective?
Definitely. We've all heard of the diverse of experience, diverse in thought, and inclusiveness, and about like diversity is being asked to come to join the table, and then or inclusion is being asked to join the table, and then you know, sorry, I forget that analogy, but so everyone has a story to tell. Everyone has diversity of experience, and including everyone, every race, gender, age, and more, and getting to know the people that you work with on the daily. I really do believe that it'll help build connection, and it'll help build that effective workplace, and then ultimately impacting mission. Because for many years, I'm sure there was like groupthink and one thought on mission, and then one when you have that diversity of experience. So I want to bring up the code talkers. So we, how we use their. Everybody should know this by now in American history that we use their language, right, during the wars. And had it not been for that, who knows if we would have, won the war, right? So, and then going a step further, I mean, we want to build an innovative 2035, right, for our Department of the Air Force. We want to build these airmen for 2035, and that's starting with diversity. It really is, and being a more inclusive culture, and bringing all these different experiences, because everyone has a story to tell. Everyone has a different mindset, different perspective on things, and once we bring them into the Air Force and the Space Force and other branches, I mean, I can imagine what a 2035 or further down the road the DoD would be.
It's exciting to think about what the future is going to be, especially with some of to us, they're big changes now. And I'm hoping that in 10 years, those are just small changes that opened up a floodgate of individuals that bring that creativity and passion for service to the country into the Air and Space Force. But you've mentioned, Francis, that you're very passionate about mentoring and coaching. And you mentioned the small part of the Air and Space Force that is of Native American background. So obviously, you're not mentoring and coaching solely in the Native American culture. You're working in the regular workforce where you have a very diverse group of people. When it comes to mentoring and coaching the airmen that you work with and the guardians that you work with as a senior NCO, what are the lessons that you work to instill in the people you lead that come from your background?
The people that I lead that come from my background?
Nope. The lessons that you gained from your background, how do you instill those lessons into the folks that you lead?
First, I in addition to answering that, I wanted to also state that our core values in the military, and I believe the other core values across the other branches, are very similar to my Lakota values. There's 7 values, and we received these from the White Buffalo Cap woman, and they are praying, respect, caring and compassion, honesty and truth, generosity and caring, humility, and then wisdom. And then, of course, we have our core values, right? Excellence in all
Yes.
we do. Yeah. So, and I really feel like these are mirrored across each other. And I think just as humans in general, if we abide by these values that we hold so dearly, and in the military, that we can do no wrong. So that's what I definitely try to instill. So 22 years in January, that'll be how long I've been in the Air Force, and it just goes by super fast. But throughout my time, currently, I definitely share all the experience that I go through. particularly in in coaching and in mentoring. Just very recently, I was part of Code Athena, and I briefed the My Vector mentoring tool, and I shared an experience of why tools like that are important. And if you haven't seen it yet, but it's a My Vectoring mentorship tool where you can link or connect with others across the DAF, and
Yes.
you can um, differentiate between different characteristics or demographics of an individual. So you can choose if they're Native American, if they have a doctorate, or if they've supervised somebody, or if they have a family, or if they have or if they're part of EFMP, the Exceptional Family Member Program, like all those things. And just so as long as the individual is okay with you know having that be available to others, you can find people either like you or not like you. And again, going back to a diversity of experience, I think it's important to have a diversity of mentors and a diversity of mentees. But at the same time, specifically for Native Americans, I think that's a good way also to connect, especially if they want to take part in our, all the things that we're doing for the Native American and Alaska Natives in the military. And side note too, you don't have to be Native American or Alaska Native to be part of in it. Side note, but to a way to connect like that, because in my story I shared that I don't remember having mentors or those in senior leadership positions that were Native American and Alaska Native, or that they identified as such. And I don't remember seeing anybody like me when I was younger
Mhm.
in the Air Force. And it kind of came like full circle. So, currently I'm a senior enlisted leader, and I have a young staff sergeant and young airmen that I mentor, and they're like, you're one of the first Native American mentors and senior enlisted leaders, that I've come across. And at first, I was taken back. I was very humbled by, what they said to me, because they said more than that. But so I feel like I've come full circle, and I feel like I can leave the Air Force better than I found it.
It's great to be in that position of high responsibility, and somebody that is as well spoken as you, outspoken as you on being a good leader and being a good role model and an example carries that really well. I,
Thank you.
there has been a time where our country, especially in the media and the portrayal of Native Americans, didn't give the respect that you carry so well to the Native American community. Portrayal in the media just was, I want to say, cartoonish, but it was worse than that. I think it um, perpetuated that generational trauma. Um, do you mind? You're passionate about this subject, and I know this about you, Francis. Would you mind sharing a little bit? Plus, you're like a movie star once removed. Um, can you share a little bit about portrayal in the media, and then maybe explain how you're a movie star once removed?
Okay. Thank you so much for bringing that up. So definitely agree. There was a time where Native Americans were not portrayed very well in the media, um, and Native American actors were not used as well, nor were they consulted when making movies about Native Americans. But very recently, I really do think that times they are changing, because there's recently the show called Reservation Dogs, or Res Dogs, which is really funny, and it's heartfelt and educational at the same time. But to talk about the movie star once removed, or however you put it,
Yep.
I so a unique thing about me is that I do have my father's aunts, uncles, cousins, other relatives, distant relatives, and friends that were in the movie Dances with Wolves. And I like to share that story too with others in the Air Force whenever they ask something unique about me. But lately, some people, mainly the younger crowd, doesn't know necessarily what that movie is. So when I have to explain it, um, it's then they're like, "Oh, that's really cool," because Dances with Wolves um, definitely reached out to the Lakota community and used Lakota people as actors and actresses in the movie and extras. And then they also um, um, consulted elders and language speakers for speaking in that movie. And one of the elders was named Doris Leader Charge.
Francis, that movie has been out since 1990, which is the same year I joined the Air Force. And so I get it. A lot of people that are actually already retired weren't in when that movie came out. But still, you mentioned that was maybe one of those movies that opened the floodgate on how to consult and get guidance from the Native American community when portraying them in films and in the media. My question
Yes.
for you is, here we are, we're 32 years down the road. Are we getting it better? Are we getting it right when it comes to that?
I think we're getting it better for sure. Um, just like in the movie Dances with Wolves, I remember uh, Mary McDonnell. Sorry, she's one of the actresses. She stands with the fist, and I know Kevin Costner and the other actresses that did not know Lakota. Um, that they definitely utilize the language speakers to speak the words correctly, and then seeing that on the big screen, because I remember um, how packed the movie theater was, and from our indigenous community, and I just remember that seeing myself on the big screen was a big deal.
Yeah.
Getting emotional about it.
Well, we'll go to a little comedy. You mentioned Reservation Dogs, and here I am. I'm watching Reservation Dogs here and picking up on a little bit of the humor. It's a different kind of humor than I maybe am used to, than most people are used to in mass-produced comedy shows. But I'm getting it. And when we talked before the podcast, you actually said you kind of have to be there to get it.
Yes.
But that crew that is making that's a lot of really hilarious stuff. And there's a spirit guide that shows up. He kind of speaks in a 21st century language, but he's all dressed in what we would consider Native American, Plains Indian garb. That's the best way that I can describe it. The guy is hilarious.
Yes. His name in real life is Dallas Goldtooth, and yeah, he's definitely hilarious, and for sure, like native comedy is definitely one that you have to be there to understand it, and specifically on the res, or if you've ever visited the res or grew up on the res or the reservation, and again, the Reservation Dogs is definitely heartfelt, funny, and educational. So I know we talked about this briefly about somebody utilizing the recently the term creatures to describe us. And we kind of talked about it briefly, but I know from my perspective, the indigenous community, we made jokes about that, right? It's kind of like laughter is the best medicine. Sorry, I don't want to say kind of. It is. Laughter is the best medicine. And if anyone other than non-indigenous were to make fun of that, of course that wouldn't be right. That wouldn't be appropriate. But for the indigenous community, it's like, we take that and we turn it into laughter, right? Because my grandma used to always tell me this, like, don't stress about things, don't be negative, just, be positive and all the things, and pray for others, because if you're negative and constantly stressed out about things, you'll make yourself sick. So I know for sure laughter is medicine, and Res Dogs is one of those shows. If your listeners out there haven't seen it yet, definitely watch it. Especially the one episode where the ancestors come. That's really a good episode.
And I'm getting there.
working through it. It also deals with some really heavy stuff regarding life on the reservation. So for me, uh, it's a good eye opener because I agree with you. Laughter is medicine. It allows people to laugh together so that they can be strong as a group, and their voices can be, kind of unified in that laughter. Uh, you've talked about going through difficult times, overcoming adversity is what makes you stronger. You said this in an article that you were featured in. More experience to share with those going through hard times. We're still fighting to have a voice in this world and for our voice to be heard and for change to happen, and you can be that change. That's your voice, that's your words. Francis, what advice do you have for people to help amplify the voice in this world that's needed for positive changes to happen?
So thank you for asking that. Be for those non-indigenous, be an ally. Get educated. I know that there are some things out there that um, most or some people might be ignorant on, means that they just don't know, right? So I still come across that in the military, um, and and for our indigenous members or our allies, speak up if something doesn't sound right. Just back to our military training, don't be a bystander, right? So that goes along with just speaking up, or just asking the question, hey, I don't know, and I would like to find out more about your culture. Can you please share with me or tell me? And the other thing to this too is that me being Lakota and Northern Arapaho, I can only speak on my experience with my tribes, and I don't speak for every Native American or Alaska Native out there. But I do know that we all have similarities in our cultures and our beliefs. However, there are some differences. Um, but yes, and for the youth out there, and not just youth, everybody. I really do believe that adversity um, helps you with gaining experience and helps you, be a quote unquote leader. I mean, I put those in quotations because I really think like everybody can be a leader, no matter your rank, no matter your age, no matter your what position you hold. Like anybody can be a leader, and I really do think that experience should be valued because you can read all you want in a book, but if you gain experience, I think that amplifies it. So I hope that answered your question.
Yes, and thank you so much for doing so. Um, Native American Heritage Month, it's important. It's important to us as an Air Force and Space Force so that we can recognize the voices and the stories that are out there. Um, what should we consider as we round out Native American Heritage Month? What are the big lessons that you think ought to be carried through for the remainder of the year as we celebrate our diverse force every day, but take this month in particular to recognize our Native American airmen and guardians?
Right. Um, Again, be educated. If you really care for your teammates, and that goes for not only just being Native American but other cultures. If you really care for your teammates, ask the question. Just be educated, and um, specifically for November, we have Thanksgiving coming up. Not all Native Americans celebrate Thanksgiving. Um, for me personally, my family, yes, we do have a turkey, and we are thankful every day for our family and our friends and the gifts that the Creator bestows upon us. Um, but the real meaning behind Thanksgiving should be also learned. Um, no time in this podcast to to give that history lesson, but that's also important too. Maybe take the day to learn the real story behind that, and going forward for the airmen and guardians, and across other branches, um, when it comes to Native Americans and Alaska Natives, just know that we are still here because I've heard from actually a handful of others now that they've had people come up to them in the year 2022 saying they didn't know Native Americans existed anymore. Um, but yeah, so just the main thing is just get educated.
Francis, thank you. And thanks for joining me on America's First Warriors. You've you've got such an amazing story and such an amazing perspective. Appreciate the impact that you're continuing to have on our military branch in the Air and Space Force. And hope you join me next week on our final episode, as we'll be joined by Jason Brown, Mr. Jason Brown, one of the many key contributors to the mission as a civilian in our Air and Space Force. Francis, thank you again for taking the time and having this conversation.
Thank you, and I appreciate it.
America's First Warriors, Stories of Today's Airmen and Guardians was sponsored by the Indigenous Nations Equality Team, an Air and Space Force Barrier Analysis Working Group. Background research and subject exploration was accomplished by Master Sgt. Francis Dupris, Buckley Space Force Base, and the 133rd Airlift Wing's podcast development team. Special thanks to Master Sergeant Lacey Roberts for her technical and cultural guidance, and to Ms. Amy Lovegren of the 133rd Airlift Wing's Public Affairs team for her production expertise. Again, I've been your host, Chief Master Sergeant Mark Legvold.